Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and we have a fabulous, fabulous guest that is coming from us out east, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Today, we are going to be speaking with Corina Walsh. Corina is an executive leadership coach, speaker, podcaster, author, and owner of Shift People Development. She's on a mission to revolutionize the way we feel about work. With her extraordinary coaching and advising skills, Corina works with companies and associations to build cultures of excellence and trust. Her innovative approaches in leadership development have garnered her accolades, including being recognized as a top 50 leader under 40 in Atlantic Canada and receiving a YWCA Women of Distinction Award in Business. Corina has delivered her keynote talks and programs across Canada, the US, and the UK, captivating audiences on crucial topics like emotional intelligence, leadership, and workplace culture. Her newest book is called Modern Manager: Conquering the Five Frustrations of Leadership. Welcome to the show, Corina.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am very excited for this conversation. It's something that I know you and I are super, super passionate about when it comes to setting leaders up for success and creating really positive cultures. Before we get into some of the themes of the book and I think our passions around creating more positive cultures, I'd love for people to get to know you a little bit better around your story, your journey, and what got you to this work that you're doing in the world.
For sure. So, 10 years ago, I was in that corporate role. I had switched jobs a few times looking for that great place to work with the great culture, and I just hadn't found it. And I was in this corporate job and I was doing, every time I started a new job, I would start with enthusiasm and I would want to make a difference and kind of always getting bogged down with the same sorts of things, whether it was maybe not a great workplace culture or it was a lack of leadership practices in the organization that were supportive, allowing people to be the best versions of themselves. It kind of seemed like every organization I worked for was happy with the status quo and kind of just wanted people to like churn out their work. And that was never okay with me. And I'm the type of person, very similar to you. I'm the type of person I want to make things better. And if I can't make things better, I'm gonna move on. And so eventually I had to leave. I had to go out on my own and say, you know what? I'm going to try to help organizations see the value in creating a different type of organization where people can be themselves, people can shine. It's not a threat to shine. Here's how that can benefit the organization. And I started off doing a lot of employee engagement work because wherever I went, when I was an employee, I just noticed how disengaged employees were. And I was like, this is a chronic problem that employees don't want to go to work every day. And I mean, life is too short for that.
Yes.
So I started doing a lot of employee engagement work, but then I realized, of course, that, the biggest driver of employee engagement is an employee's relationship with their manager. And if managers don't have the tools, how can they lead? How can they engage their team on a regular basis, on a daily basis, when they're just barely surviving themselves? So that's when I kind of shifted a little and focused more on, becoming this leadership development company where I get to help managers get the tools that they need to lead their teams effectively so they don't burn out, so they can engage their employees every single day. And specifically now, I spend most of my time helping newer managers who were promoted because they have this strong technical ability, but they're lacking in those people leadership skills. So that's the journey in a nutshell of how I ended up here.
Wow. Yes, I connect a lot with the technical leaders that now all of a sudden have to be people leaders. They're like, oh, what's this? Like, I'm having to manage these humans all day long. Like, that's not what I signed up for. Um, I'm curious, even if we were to back up for a second, when you were doing the engagement work, what was your experience around the engagement work from a couple of lenses? One, were there common themes that you were seeing in the engagement? I'm assuming leadership's going to be one of them, but anything else that you were seeing? And then the second piece is, Did you find the executive team or whoever brought you in was open to hearing what they were getting in the engagement and doing something with it? Because there's been some of my experience was where they would see it, and I've been in rooms where literally some of the leadership would be reading it, and consistently several people, well, no, 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 that's not right. That's not, and like, well, it is because it's their experience. That might not feel like it should be their experience to you, but it is. So it was just interesting. I'm like, this is going to be, it's like there was an appetite to hear what they had to say, supposedly, but then once they actually had to hear what they had to say, they didn't actually want to look at themselves in the mirror and see how they might be contributing to that kind of culture and the workplace that's creating those kinds of lack of engagement.
I mean, you just nailed it, right? That was the exact experience that I had, and it's part of why I shifted that work. So some of the common themes I found when I was doing the employee, and I still do employee engagement work. It's from a slightly different angle, and it's not the core part of my business anymore. But yes, the common themes obviously were leadership. Employees were struggling to work with their own manager or to have a voice and to be heard by executive leaders and have that feedback taken seriously, as you just clearly articulated. Another interesting theme that I found when I was doing employee engagement work was that employees were also kind of giving up their power a lot. And
Mm,
I would say that I was guilty of that too when I was working for someone else. It's
okay.
easy to feel really powerless at work, but you have to remember that you are responsible for your own experience at work every single day.
Yeah.
You can't control other people.
Yeah.
You can influence other people to a point,
Mhm.
but you are responsible for the attitude, the thoughts, and the beliefs that you bring to work every day. So you do have a certain amount of control and influence over your own experience at work. Now, there's a caveat to that. If you're working in a pretty toxic environment, there's a stronger chance that that environment's going to change you before you change it.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful with that. But just imagine if every employee took responsibility for how they were showing up to work every day, how might you create that shift? Now, I still preach that message in my work when I get to do speaking engagements inside an organization. And you'll see some light bulbs go off
Mm,
with employees, and some people will realize that they have not been taking that responsibility, but then other people don't necessarily want to hear it, and they're still content to blame their manager or blame the executive leadership. So that was an interesting theme that I found. And I still, again, talk about that with organizations. And I had the same experience with you, being asked to do employee engagement surveys and then executive leadership saying, well, we weren't aware of this. And I'm like, well, I think you just found the problem
yeah.
then.
Well, now you are aware. So what are we going to do with it?
Yeah, and there was a lot of that. I call it, trying to solve $1 million problem with a couple of $100.
Yes.
It just doesn't
Yeah.
work. And you're getting the data, you're willing to do the survey, but you're not necessarily willing to do the work as you pointed out. And or maybe you're willing to do the surface level work. And I
Right.
call that the perks, the parties, and the prizes,
Yes.
right? The three Ps,
Yes.
which is the low hanging fruit. And again, that's trying to solve a huge problem with a couple of $100.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't work. So I have found a way to do this leadership work, which the root of that is improving employee engagement and changing the culture. But
Hmm.
I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle that's more about empowering managers with the tools that they need.
Yeah, and I think it's so important what you're sharing there. Like a couple of things which I would hear a lot too is that like wanting to put on band-aids instead of getting at the root. And if you're going to just put on band-aids, then of course you're not going to really solve it. And guess what? It ends up being costly over time. Sometimes you have to invest a little bit more upfront, but then the return on investment for that is huge, right? Huge, huge, huge. Because we know what happens if people are all of a sudden treated differently or in an environment that how much it impacts productivity and presenteeism, which we don't want when people are there, but they're not really there and they're only doing the bare minimum, all the different stuff that comes along with it, which I find really, really, really interesting. But I also like, in general, I think most leaders don't wake up in the morning and say, I cannot wait to go to work today and be the biggest jerk. Like, I cannot wait. Like, okay, I'm awake and then I get to go to work and go be a jerk for the entire day. there's a very small percentage that are, narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths that hopefully not psychopaths, but sociopaths who have lack of conscience, that they might be somewhere thinking about those things. But the bigger 90% of people, it's that they don't have the tools.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, yeah,
And they don't have the tool. And you're 100% accurate. Nobody wakes up every morning and says, I can't wait for my employees to hate me today. A lot of managers, especially from frontline and middle manager, they're really in that hard place where they probably don't have the tools. They have to pass along these decisions that they did not get to make, and they have to try and get buy-in for it. It's a tough, tough place to be.
yeah,
You need, and today's manager has so much more pressure and so many different aspects to their role. The manager today is not just simply managing a flow of work. They have to be a people manager, and that is complex. It requires a lot of training and a lot of tools to do it well. So it's empathy for the manager. And that's another message that I've been trying to get across lately too. Like if you are saying that you have a people first culture or a people centric culture,
right.
please remember that you have to include your managers in that. And those managers need support and they
Yeah,
need training and they need to be kept
yeah,
in the loop
yeah.
and they need someone caring about their resilience and well-being as well. And you can't be resilient if you don't have the tools you need to do your job.
Absolutely. I think that's really important what you've just emphasized there because I think as you make your way up the organization, various areas of leadership, I actually saw during the pandemic leaders who were being super empathetic, super compassionate, but actually at their own expense, right? They were
Yes.
just taking on things because they saw how their employees were struggling. And now you've got your managers who are struggling because
That's
they're
right.
taking too much on too. And I saw that multiple levels. I actually saw very senior people doing that as well, right? And coming from a great place, right? Having the positive intent that they see how others are struggling, yet not recognizing that they are now going to be in that pool very quickly of struggling as well because it's not sustainable. Okay, so if we start to think about and I think that I love that you're speaking to new leaders, but I also think some of these things are going to be very relevant to people who have worked their way up. Because my experience is some people have, they worked in, they're now, at the VP level, director, wherever
Mm.
it may be. But the people who they saw modeling leadership, they didn't necessarily, they kind of like brought some tools together. Some were working, some are not. So I think it doesn't matter what level you are in the organization, this can be very valuable to you. So, what are some of those five themes that you're really focusing on in the book?
Yeah, so over the course of coaching and training managers for 10 years, obviously I know pretty closely what the core challenges are going to be for any manager, whether you're new or experienced. And so one of the biggest challenges is this micromanagement misunderstanding. We're all familiar with how awful micromanagement is, but today's newer generation of leader is so terrified of being labeled a micromanager. They don't manage enough.
Right.
They don't understand the balance. They're not understanding that sometimes you're going to have to put in a lot of upfront effort to get your team where you need them to be.
Yeah.
So there's a micromanagement misunderstanding, which is leading to undermanagement.
Yeah.
The second challenge is what I call delegation disappointment.
Right.
This manager is trying to delegate,
Yeah.
but either they're struggling to let go of the work or they're delegating, but they're delegating with an incomplete process, which means they're not going to get the results that they need. So then they start telling themselves stories of, I'm just going to take this work back and do it myself because it's
Yeah.
faster and easier if I do it myself.
Yeah.
You and I both know those
Yeah.
stories and where they come from.
Mm-hmm.
The third challenge to overcome is giving constructive feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, we don't have a problem giving positive feedback, but when you have to give constructive feedback, you have to deliver it in a way that motivates and inspires the employee to want to accept and use that feedback.
Yeah.
So I call that the feedback fiasco when a manager doesn't understand how to have those feedback conversations, or they're so avoidant they can't even think about giving someone constructive feedback. But you and I, as coaches, you and I both know you can't improve without feedback. It's essential.
Absolutely. It's huge, right? Because, and a lot of times high performers actually are like they really want to get that feedback
Yes.
because they're constantly wanting to learn and grow and figure out those different ways that they can strengthen their leadership because that is part of their pathway. And I definitely see that as well. Many leaders who struggle to have those. Sometimes it's difficult conversations, but sometimes it's not even difficult. Or they don't give the feedback in a specific direct way to help them be able to use it to be able to have some specific behavioral things they can be doing differently. So it's like they give it, but they half give it, or there's, yeah, the constructive feedback. When you talk about the feedback one, I'm curious, do you also speak to, because I find also leaders struggle with not only giving feedback, but asking for feedback to be able to hear what they can continue to be doing to get better, because what works really well for one individual is exactly the opposite of what works for another individual.
Yes, absolutely. I do help managers understand how to get good feedback as well, but also how to accept that feedback and not get defensive.
Yeah.
Because if you want your employees to accept your feedback, you have to be able to accept it too. And I have this great story about this leader that who I worked with and wrote a case study about, who was a master at this. And he sent out a simple two-question survey to his employees and saying, what about my leadership style is working for you? What about my leadership style is not working for you? And it was anonymous, so people felt comfortable to give that feedback. And
Nice.
he was so transparent. He printed off all the improvements,
Yeah.
put it up on his wall on his office, and he works on one or two things a week. That's how transparent he is. That's the level of trust and transparency that employees want today from a leader.
Mm,
So when it comes to getting feedback, you have to ask the right questions.
yes.
Like, don't just say, "How am I doing?" Because you know everyone is just going to say, "Oh, you're fine."
Right, right,
No, you're doing
right,
okay. You're doing
right.
okay.
Yeah.
That's not helpful at all.
Yeah.
So, am I supporting you enough? Am I checking in with you often enough? Did I communicate that in a way that it worked for you?
Hmm.
Ask really specific questions, you'll get better answers. And you and I are coaches. We both know it's all about the
Hmm.
asking the right questions.
Hmm.
Don't be afraid to ask those questions and don't be afraid of the results that you're going to hear.
Yeah. And I also say sometimes you have to ask that multiple times because they have
Yes.
had experiences in the past where
Yes.
somebody
Yes.
asked, but they didn't actually want to know.
Fair
They
enough.
asked and then they actually said, "Oh, okay. Thanks for asking. Yeah, here's some feedback." And then, like you said about being defensive, they didn't have a good response. And then all of a sudden they think, "I'm not going to do that again. I'm not going to be vulnerable and share because I had a really bad experience last time." So if there's not a lot of trust and psychological safety, they're not going to go there again.
That's essential. You have to have the awareness to really monitor your own reaction and your response to those types of conversations. And to your point, if you haven't taken the time yet to build up trust and psychological safety, you're probably not going to get the answers anyway.
Exactly, exactly. Which I love with that person how is anonymous. That's what I like with my 360s. I find they get really rich data, and I don't ask lots of questions, but it's those ones. What are they doing really well? What could they do be doing better when it comes to um, potential development areas as a leader? And they get tons of awesome feedback. And I like what you said there. I've had a leader too. It was a CEO, which I think is so great to see that coming from the top, and he would highlight that and put it out there and constantly be having dialogues and what he's working on, which is such a great lead by example, right? Because then others are going to feel more comfortable to be modeling and using that with their employees as well.
That's exactly it.
So
Yeah.
good. Okay, so we've got our first three. Okay, number four.
Number four is what I call coaching confusion. So there's a lot of pressure on managers these days, even frontline managers, to coach their team and their employees, and they're going to get that directive from their manager. Just coach them. Look, this employee is not performing. Just coach them. Have they received training
Right.
on how to coach? Do they understand the difference between coaching, training, counseling, mentoring? You and I know the difference. We're well trained. You and I know how many hours of practice it takes to be a good coach. And if you've been through sport, if you've played on sports teams, you might have a different idea of what coaching is.
Yeah.
And so, and even if you've had some training on how to have a coaching conversation or how to coach on the spot, a lot of managers come back to me and they're like, well, the employee just responds with, I don't know. I don't know. So, there's a different type of conversation that has to happen then. So, this putting this pressure on managers to coach their team without ever helping them understand the nuances of a coaching conversation, I find that to be particularly irresponsible and causing a lot of frustration
Yeah.
with my clients for sure.
Yes.
And then the last frustration is the motivation misunderstanding.
Mm.
So, you know, when you step into your first management role, I think the biggest shock for everyone is, oh, I'm no longer responsible for motivating myself, and I'm no longer responsible for my own performance. I have to get performance out of other people. How am I going to motivate other people? And I already mentioned this in our conversation. The first course of action is typically the perks, parties, and prizes.
Right.
They typically rely on these extrinsic motivators. You and I both know those things are good and they'll get a certain result, but you have to hit those intrinsic motivators. You have to understand how individual motivation is. What motivates Kristen is not necessarily going to motivate Karina.
Yeah.
And you have to have those conversations to figure out what's going to motivate someone and what they respond to.
Mhm.
And that's when you can figure out how to unlock that level of performance that you need from your team.
Yeah, I think it's so critical that one because you have different personalities, you have different drivers, you
Mhm.
have different seasons in life. Like all of those things are going to impact. I remember you sharing in the book too, and I think this is would fall under some of these categories too in terms of motivating and engaging. It's so interesting because people don't think so much necessarily that you're going to go from individual contributor to leader. That now people who are your peers could be reporting to you.
Yeah.
Now, people who are maybe much more senior than you could be reporting to you. Somebody who you might feel like has way more expertise is reporting to you, but that's okay because the goal isn't supposed to be that you're going to have the expertise on everybody's job, but it can be a big shift to move into that as well. What has been your experience with some of those elements?
That is a huge shift and one of the biggest problems facing the first-time manager today, because we have can have up to 5 generations in the workplace. There's a strong chance that a first-time manager is going to have people who are older than them or more experienced with them on the team. It's such a huge problem. I dedicated an entire episode on my own podcast
Nice.
just on that topic of how to get past this mindset issue of these people were my peers, or and now they report to me, or there's someone older and more experienced on the team. And so, but that leads back to a larger issue. And the larger issue for most of my clients is that they don't understand the role of a manager today
Hmm.
because that role has changed so much. It changed, it had been changing, and then the pandemic hit and it changed a lot, and now it's changing again. So you have to understand what your role is as a manager. And that's really what I tried to capture in my book as well. It's not just about the tasks and the work, it's how you support your people. And you're exactly right. You don't need to know it all, you don't need to have the answers. It's your job to understand who are the people on your team, what are their strengths, how can you remove the obstacles in front of them so that they can activate those strengths and use those strengths. And so, understanding your role as manager is critical to success, but critical to maintaining that resilience so you don't overmanage or undermanage.
Mm, yeah, so true. And something else that you talked about in the book that I think is such an important topic as well is around what's the kind of dialogue and conversation that you're even having with someone before they're even looking at potentially going into a leadership role. And I love the way you said it. You're like, it's your responsibility to be talking more and helping them to understand this is exactly what you're walking into. This is what this is going to look like. Does this feel like something that feels aligned for you? Because I think sometimes what happens as well, and I don't just think, I know because I've experienced a lot of it, where people just think, well, the only pathway is up. I need to just keep working my way up the ladder. And they get into leadership and they realize it's not actually what I want. I don't enjoy it. I actually am much happier being an individual contributor. But maybe what I need right now is I've really I feel like I've hit the top of my current role and maybe I want a lateral move. Maybe I want another area of the business where I get to still feel like I'm growing and developing and learning new skills and getting outside of my comfort zone. But I don't necessarily need to do that by leading others. And I think it is really important, as you discuss in the book, that more time is spent up front being very realistic around what it looks like. And is this the right pathway for you? Because for some, that might not be the right pathway.
That's exactly it. I encourage companies to have multiple career pathways that don't, and they can't all involve being a people manager. That cannot be the only avenue anymore. Some people are not cut out for management. Some people don't want to be in people management.
Yeah.
And I outlined that in the book as well. But back to your initial point there, I do think it's irresponsible for companies to simply just say, "Oh, you're a really good individual contributor. Therefore, you'll be a good team leader." You do need to have that conversation up front because wherever I go in this world, whether I'm sitting on a plane, whether I'm sitting in a coffee shop, if someone asks me what I do for a living, immediately, the story is, let me tell you what happened to me when they promoted me to management the first time. And they go off on this awful story about how horrible it was for them. It's heartbreaking for me to continue to hear the same story over and over again. It was the motivation for writing this book. If you are going to promote someone to management, if a team needs a new team leader, talk to whomever you think will be the right person. Let them know what's expected of them. Let them know the reality of what it's going to look like to support a team. And please get them some training. Please get them some training.
I mean, I think you're 100% right, and I think it is very irresponsible to put somebody into leadership and give them no training, like give them
That's
no
right.
tools
It
and be
is.
like, hope it goes well. Like you're not
Good
doing
luck.
anything to set that person up for success. I mean, I think there are some parallels as I think about it in parenting as well, because I also think that people get like before it's like all this time spent on, okay, you're gonna have the baby and here's how you have the baby and so much emphasis on that. And then all
Yep.
of a sudden it's like, oh, and hope it goes well for you. Like you leave the hospital and the parents are like, what? Like you're trusting me with this little baby. And it's such a journey. And I think hopefully a lot of parents proactively on their own realize they need to go get tools and resources to help learn the journey. But in organization, you have people working for you that have been promoted into this role, and you want them to be able to hit business outcomes for you and be successful. Why are you not investing in your leaders? And I believe at all levels, to be honest, because I think as you move your way up the organization, the challenges might look a little bit different and they start to become even more high stakes. And so if you don't have a sounding board and someone to support, and whether that's individually through coaching, whether that's through community, which I also think is beautiful. I'm sure I'd love to hear your thoughts on this because I think when you have cohorts going through together, you feel so much less alone and realize some of the challenges, insecurities, limiting beliefs, challenges you're having. You realize, oh, you're a person right across the hallway is having the exact same challenge, but you somehow think in your mind, oh, it's just me. I'm the only one that's struggling with this. And it's not true. It's not true. Everyone's struggling.
Exactly. And my work is largely cohort based for that point that you just made, the community. The consistent feedback that I get on the feedback forms from my group programs is that I had no idea everyone else was struggling with the same thing. And the value of this program was in the community, was in the group, and hearing everyone go through the same challenges. And yes, there's different types of leadership development required depending on what level of leadership you're at. And however, what I need to say about that too is, but if you didn't have the foundation, your house is going to be shaky. And I mean, that's even how my book opens. What would you say if I told you to build your house on a shaky foundation? You'd never do it. But
Yes.
a lot of leadership journeys are built on shaky foundation because they didn't have the core skills at the very, very beginning. You made that point earlier. They picked up a few tricks and tools of the trade here and there.
Yeah.
Uh, but you have to have that strong foundation for your journey. Absolutely. And different skills, different knowledge and tools required at every level of leadership.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So when you start to think about, the name of the show is Inspirational Leadership. And when you start to think about an inspiring leader, what are some of the behaviors, attributes you would associate with someone who's an inspiring leader?
That's such a great question. I've definitely had the privilege of working with some really inspiring leaders. I didn't necessarily report to them, but they were around me. And some of them have become my clients as well. And being proactive would be a very inspiring leadership quality for me, and not waiting for problems or not waiting for your employee to come to you. Like there's a story in my book about a leader, one of the best leaders I never got to work for. I worked adjacent to her on
Yeah,
a project
yeah,
and I was struggling.
yeah,
And she picked up on that. And she came to me because I was that young first time manager who was embarrassed
yeah,
to admit that I was struggling. And I was struggling with someone on her team. So I really didn't want to go to her.
yeah.
She didn't wait. She came to me and she sat in my office
Mm,
across from me, even though she was much higher up than me technically in the organizational ladder. It's that humility, it's that proactiveness, it's and noticing, being tuned in to the people who
yeah.
are around you. That's the inspirational leader for me. And of course, like having that self-awareness to know to ask for feedback, like you and I have mentioned,
Mhm.
knowing that you're having this impact on everyone around you through your leadership style, and I need to get feedback on that. I need to find out if I'm doing things well or what things I'm not doing well and how can I improve on that. So I think those are being proactive and having that self-awareness are two key things that I find to be extremely inspiring.
Yeah, and I feel like that's so connected with the emotional intelligence too, right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
somebody who has that strong emotional intelligence, they just have this natural desire to want
Mm,
to continue to improve and be able to have the humility and the vulnerability to be able to ask others and not feel like it's somehow a deficit, that it's their opportunity to continue to learn and grow. And if I think about over this podcast has been around for almost 5 years, and I don't think they've said humility for sure, but haven't said it the way you said with the being proactive. And I think it's so true because proactive, and then also the way you've expanded on that to be paying attention to the nuances and observing and be tuning into what you're seeing around you. How beautiful is that for you to go out of your way and see where someone might be struggling before they come to you? Because for a variety of reasons, whether there's that confidence or there could be consequences. And so someone's like, I can't do that because I might be perceived as X, Y, Z. And so it's not safe for me to go say something. And to do that proactively, to me, that feels like also your role as a leader, which is being that mentor and also looking for all those ways to be able to give back. Like you're never done and you've been there before and you've been in their shoes, which the
mhm.
empathy is coming through. And so when you see someone that could be potentially struggling like that, to go out of your way to see how you can support them is such a beautiful part of leadership.
I agree. For sure. It's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Taking care of the people around you.
Right, right. So for somebody might be listening right now, so this might be an HR leader, it might be a CEO that says, I hear what Karina and Kristen are saying, and I think maybe we aren't investing in this way. What are some steps you would give them for where they could start if they're really saying, you know what, I want to start to invest in my leaders because I understand that's actually what's going to have the biggest ROI, and that's where you're getting at the root instead of putting on band-aids.
Absolutely. I would say always check in with your people first. Because a lot of people, a lot of organizations will come to me and say, what do I think their people need? And that's wonderful. I'm happy to share my insights and my knowledge on that. And what I'm going to say is,
Yeah.
let's go back and talk to your people. Let's go back and figure out where they're struggling, especially your managers. What skill sets are they missing? What tools are they missing? And then let's customize something that's going to work. Because, and most managers are dealing with similar struggles, but still, it's always nice to be able to put that customized, really bespoke type of approach where you know what you deliver is going to truly hit the areas that your people need. I would say first and foremost, go back and talk to your people and find out where they might be struggling, and then let's work together to figure out the right solution for that, for sure.
Beautiful. Is there anything that you would like to say if I gave you a magic wand and you were going to go into organizations and say, hey, organizations, this is what I think you should be thinking about more of when it comes to really building positive cultures?
Oh my gosh, so many things. Um, I would say remembering that employee engagement, positive workplace cultures, and effective leadership is a daily action.
Mhm.
It's a daily thing. It's not a one-off.
Mhm.
It's not a magic fix. It's a daily commitment. And so, what do your people need to be able to do those commitments on a daily basis? And reminding everyone of that, that every single person who walks into this organization every day is making a contribution one way or the other. So we have to remind each other of that. And let's make that commitment daily to make this place the best place to work possible, to clear the obstacles for each other, to be the best versions of ourselves, if that's what you want. You're not
Mhm.
required to do that.
Mhm.
Hopefully, it's what you want.
Yes.
And then, how can the organization support that daily commitment?
I love that. And I'm the same as you. I always take it from both angles, right? What can the organization be doing, but what can you as the
Yeah,
individual? Because I don't think it's one or the other, right? Because we as individuals every day are showing up and we can feel empowered and have agency around what
that's
we
right.
can be doing differently and what we can so that we can take our power back in that way. And I like how you use the caveat because I think when we're dealing with an extreme toxic situation, that's not the same thing. We have people who are dealing with trauma and PTSD from some of these environments. And that I
That's
would
right.
say, if possible, what can you do to get out of there? Because your health and your safety is so much more important, if that's possible. But I find there's a lot, we're not looking at this extreme over here. It's this middle, right? They're in this middle and things could look different. And I think sometimes it's also around the individual being able to manage up, have dialogues, be able to feel empowered because I've seen it work many times. I can't tell you how many times I've coached people to manage up and have some really, really powerful conversations that if they hadn't had those conversations, they just could have had assumptions and created narratives and stories about what was true that wasn't actually true.
Exactly. Yeah. That remembering that you have that agency. And again, that's another tool that a lot of people don't have. And when they get to work with someone like you or me, they get the advantage of that for sure.
Right, right, all of that. I always like to give my guests an opportunity to share. Is there a favorite book? If you think about some of the books, and if there's a couple, you're allowed more than one. But what is a book that has had a really big impact in your life that somebody else might want to have a read as well?
For sure. I think The Big Leap by Gay
Mm,
Hendricks.
yes.
As a coach, I have to pick that book. I don't have to pick that book. I choose that book, of course, because I'm fascinated by human behavior and I'm intrigued by human potential.
Great.
And Gay Hendricks, covers this principle, this self-sabotage thing that we do as humans. And a lot of my clients in their leadership roles might be self-sabotaging some of their own progress.
Yes.
And or they might have employees who are self-sabotaging. And it's such a common human condition.
Yes.
I'm so fascinated by it. So the big leap has changed my business. It's changed my life. I recommend it to everyone. No matter what you're going through, I'm
Yeah.
like, just read The Big Leap.
Yeah, it's such a great book. And I was really fascinated with how we like the upper leveling and how we get to this
Yep,
certain threshold and then say we can't go higher.
that's
And
right.
not that for me, it wasn't, I didn't say I could go higher, but it was kind of like my goal was, okay, as long as I can leave corporate and be an entrepreneur and be able to have the same revenue I had in corporate, then I've arrived. And then, of course, I quickly learned like, no, 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 we could double or triple. But the revenue is coming from such a different place because I think of it as the more of that revenue, the more I can now put it back into the economy and be supporting things that are very aligned with what I want to create in the world. So money opens doors, but to be used in a very aligned, value-based way.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a great book. Karina, where can people learn more about you, your work, your podcast, all the things?
Sure, yeah. So LinkedIn is a great way to connect with me and to get kind of that daily tidbit of leadership tools and inspiration that you need. My website is shiftpd.com, so shiftpd.com. My podcast is called The People and Culture Success Show.
Yeah.
And I hope people will pick up a copy of Modern Manager, Conquering the Five Frustrations of Leadership. And it will help you understand and kind of do a little self-assessment as to where you might be missing some key tools and some key strategies.
Fantastic. And we will have all of those in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today, Karina.
Thank you for having me. You're one of my favorite people to talk to. So this conversation was inspiring.
Oh, I feel the same way. And for everyone, wherever you are in the world, we're saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, sending tons of love. And I will have everything in the show notes around Karina. If you're interested in learning more about working with me with one-on-one coaching, leadership development programs, or transformational keynotes, all really focused on creating more emotional intelligence and positive human cultures, I would love to have a conversation. Please get in touch. And don't forget to share this podcast episode with others and let them know about inspirational leadership. The more others know about it, the more it gets amplified on all the podcast platforms. Thanks so much. Bye bye, everyone.